I have walked into homes that were not at peace, and I could feel it before I crossed the threshold. Not because of anything dramatic, no strange sounds, nothing that would make for a good story at a dinner table. It was quieter than that, a stillness with a different quality than ordinary quiet, a weight that settled on me the moment I stepped inside. And almost every time, almost without exception, when I stayed long enough to understand what I was looking at, I found the same thing. Objects, specific kinds of objects, kept in specific kinds of ways. I'm Father David. I've been a priest for over 40 years, and I have made more pastoral visits than I could begin to count, to the sick, to the grieving, to women who were holding their faith together with both hands and needed someone to sit with them in the hard places. And over those decades, something became clear to me that no one had ever spelled out in the seminary. Not everything a person leaves behind is spiritually neutral. I want to say that again because I think it may be the most important sentence in everything I share with you today. Not everything a person leaves behind is spiritually neutral. Now, before I go any further, I need to say something clearly because I do not want to create confusion or fear where there should be none. The vast majority of what we keep from those who have passed is perfectly good. A wedding ring, a crucifix that hung in their bedroom, a Bible with their handwriting in the margins, photographs, letters, a rosary worn smooth by years of prayer. These things are not only acceptable to keep, they can be genuine sources of grace. Blessed objects carry a spiritual reality. They connect the living to the dead through the communion of saints, which is not a metaphor. It is a living, active bond, and it is beautiful. But there are things, and I have encountered them more often than I want to admit, that fall into a different category entirely. Things that should not be kept. Not because grief is wrong, not because holding on to someone you loved is wrong, but because certain objects carry a spiritual weight that the living were never meant to carry inside their home. I want to tell you about a woman I visited. I'll call her Constance, in the spring, maybe 8 years ago. She had lost her husband Edmund after 51 years of marriage. She was deeply faithful. She prayed her rosary every morning. She came to daily mass when her health allowed. By every external measure, she was doing everything right. But something was wrong. Her children had called me, not because they could explain it. They said, "Father, she hasn't been herself since Edmund died, and we don't mean that in the ordinary way." They meant something they couldn't quite name, a flatness, a distance, as though she was somewhere else, or as though something else was occupying the space that grief was supposed to move through. When I visited, I spent 2 hours in that parlor, and toward the end, I don't know why I asked, but something prompted me. I said, "Constance, did Edmund leave anything behind that you've been keeping and aren't quite sure what to do with?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He had some things from before we were married, from before he came back to the church." I asked her where she kept them. She pointed to a wooden box on the shelf above the fireplace. The relief on her face when I asked if we could look at it together, the way her shoulders released just from being asked, told me everything I needed to know before I even opened it. What was inside that box, I'll tell you in a few minutes. But I want to say this first, because it is the foundation of everything we are going to discuss. God does not want you to live in a house that is spiritually compromised. He did not bring you through the loss of someone you loved, only to leave you carrying something that does not belong in the home of a child of God. And He gave the church, and He gave priests, the wisdom to recognize these things and help you understand what to do about them. There are specific categories of objects I want to walk you through today. Objects I have encountered again and again in the homes of grieving Catholics. Objects that carry dangers most people never recognize because no one has ever taken the time to explain it to them plainly. Don't go anywhere yet, because the first category is the one that surprises people most, and it may already be somewhere in your house. Let me tell you what was in that box. There were 3 items: a deck of tarot cards, old ones, worn at the edges, clearly used many times over many years. A small figurine that I recognized immediately as belonging to a spiritualist tradition. And a folded paper with handwriting on it. Names, dates, what appeared to be some kind of ritual notation. Edmund had been involved in these things before his conversion. He had come back to the church in his 50s, genuinely by all accounts, and had never spoken of this period of his life to Constance or to anyone. She had found the box only when she was sorting through the last of his belongings, and because she loved him, because throwing things away felt like erasing him, because grief does not always let us think clearly, she had placed the box on the shelf above the fireplace and left it there for 11 months. I took those items out of the house that afternoon. I prayed over each one. I disposed of them according to the church's guidance, and within 2 weeks, Constance's daughter called me to say that her mother seemed, in her words, like herself again. Now, I want to be careful here, because I am not telling you this story to frighten you, and I am not telling it to make you feel that you have done something wrong if you are in a similar situation. What I want you to understand is this: Edmund's past was not Constance's fault. The objects were not her sin. But their presence in the home was a problem she was not equipped to see, because no one had ever given her the categories to recognize it. That is what I want to give you today. The first category of objects that should never remain in the home of a faithful Catholic is the most obvious once you know it, and yet I have found these things in the homes of good women more times than I can count. Objects connected to occult or spiritist practices. Tarot cards, Ouija boards, items used in seances or rituals intended to contact the dead outside the sanction of the church. Figures or symbols from traditions that invoke spiritual forces other than God. These are not antiques. They are not curiosities. They are not harmless because the person who used them is now gone. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 18, is not ambiguous about this. God tells his people explicitly, these practices are not permitted. Not because God is arbitrary, but because the spiritual realm is real, and objects that have been used as doorways, used with intention, used repeatedly, do not become inert simply because the hand that held them is now still. I have to be honest with you here, and I say this as gently as I know how. I have met women who held on to these things out of love, because they could not bear to touch anything that belonged to the person they lost, because sorting through someone's belongings is one of the most painful things a human being can do. And grief makes us freeze. It makes us leave things exactly as they were, as though moving them means admitting something we are not ready to admit. I understand that. I have sat with it in too many kitchens and parlors to count. But love for the dead does not require us to keep what they themselves, in their clearest moments, would have wanted gone. Edmund came back to the church. He would not have wanted those items in his wife's home. He would have been the first to say so. There is a second woman I want to tell you about. I'll call her Miriam. She came to me not about objects that were obviously connected to the occult. Her situation was quieter, more common, I think, than people realize. Her mother had died the previous autumn, a devout woman, Sunday Mass, daily rosary, the whole of it. But Miriam had discovered, tucked inside a prayer book, several items she could not quite explain. Small sachets of herbs, a handwritten prayer in a language she didn't recognize, a coin with markings on it. Her mother had emigrated from another country as a young woman, and these were remnants of folk traditions she had carried with her, traditions that had blended imperfectly with her Catholic faith over decades. Miriam asked me, "Father, is it wrong that I kept them? I didn't know what they were. I just didn't want to throw away anything that was hers." I told her the truth, gently, carefully, because you deserve the same truth, and I want to give it to you in full. Because the second and third categories are the ones that most people carrying them would never suspect. Let me finish Miriam's story, because what I told her that afternoon is something I believe many of you need to hear. The items she had found, the sachets, the coin, the handwritten prayer, were remnants of a folk tradition her mother had absorbed long before she fully understood her Catholic faith. They were not malicious. Her mother had not been a wicked woman. She had been a woman of imperfect formation, like most of us, carrying fragments of old beliefs alongside the faith she genuinely held. But well-intentioned and spiritually safe are not the same thing. They never have been. I told Miriam to bring the items to me. We prayed together. I blessed her home. And I said something to her that I want to say to you now, because I think it is the truest thing I know on this subject. The love you have for the person who is gone does not live in their objects. It lives in you. It lives in your prayers for them. It lives in every Mass you offer for the repose of their soul. When you release something that should not be kept, you are not releasing them. You are releasing a weight that was never yours to carry. Now, there is a third category, and this one is the most misunderstood, because it does not involve anything obviously connected to the occult. It involves nothing sinister on the surface, and yet I have seen it cause more lasting spiritual harm than almost anything else I've encountered. It is this: objects kept as substitutes for prayer. A room left exactly as it was the day they died. A chair no one is permitted to sit in. A closet no one is permitted to open. A collection of belongings arranged so carefully, so deliberately, that visiting it has become a ritual. Not a Catholic ritual, not a prayer, but something that functions like one. A private shrine to the absence of a person, maintained with a devotion that belongs to God alone. I knew a man, I will call him Philip, who had lost his wife of 47 years. He had converted her bedroom into what I can only describe as a museum. Her reading glasses on the nightstand, her rosary draped over the bedpost exactly where she had left it, her slippers beside the bed. He went in every evening and sat for an hour. He did not pray in there. He sat. And he told me, when I finally asked, that sitting in that room was the only time he felt close to her. I did not tell him to dismantle the room. That was not what he needed from me in that moment. But over the following months, as we talked, something became clear. Philip was not praying for his wife. He was sitting with the idea of her. And the room, the objects, the arrangement, the ritual of it, had become a wall between him and the real spiritual work of interceding for her soul. He had stopped offering masses for her. He had stopped his rosary. Why pray? She was right there in that room every evening. She was not right there, and somewhere underneath the grief, he knew it. St. Francis de Sales, who wrote with extraordinary pastoral clarity about the interior life, said something that has stayed with me for decades. He said that unhealthy attachments do not simply distract the soul from God. They actively hold the soul in a place where God cannot reach it the way He intends. The attachment becomes a room the soul refuses to leave. And grace, which moves forward, cannot carry a soul that will not move. The objects themselves in Philip's case were innocent: a rosary, a pair of glasses, slippers, not one of them spiritually dangerous in isolation, but together in the way he was using them, as a replacement for prayer, as a point of contact with the dead outside the communion of saints. They had become something that needed to be addressed. I want to say very clearly, the Church does not tell us to erase our dead from our homes. Photographs are beautiful. Keeping a beloved rosary is beautiful. Having a small corner where you light a candle and pray for someone, that is exactly right. That is the tradition. That is what the saints did. The question is always, is this object drawing me toward prayer, toward Mass, toward the sacraments, or is it pulling me away from them? Is it a door, or has it become a wall? That is the question I want to leave with you before we close, because the answer will tell you everything you need to know about whether something in your home belongs there. And there is one more thing I need to say about what to do when you realize something needs to go. It is simpler than you think, and more powerful than you may have been told. I want to tell you what happened to Constance. After that afternoon, after I removed the items from the wooden box and blessed her home, she called me about 10 days later, not because something dramatic had occurred, because something had stopped occurring. The heaviness she had been living with, the flatness her children had described, the sense that she was not quite present in her own life. It was lifting, slowly, the way fog lifts. Not all at once, but unmistakably. She told me she had started praying her rosary again, not as an obligation the way it had become, but with, her word, appetite. She said, "Father, I feel like I can reach Him again, like the line is open." That phrase has stayed with me. The line is open. Because that is exactly what we are talking about underneath all of it. Not rules, not prohibitions for their own sake. We are talking about what keeps the line open between the living and the dead, between your prayer and the soul you are praying for, between your home and the God who wants to inhabit it fully. Now, I promised you something at the end of the last section. I said there was something simple and powerful that you could do when you realize an object in your home should not be there. And I meant it. You do not handle these things alone. That is the first and most important principle. Call your priest. Bring the item to him or ask him to come to you. Ask for a blessing of your home. This is not an exorcism. I want to be clear about that, because I know that word can create unnecessary alarm. It is simply the Church doing what the Church has always done, claiming a space for God, clearing out what does not belong, and asking His protection over what remains. Priests do this. It is part of what we are for. And I can tell you from experience, from more home visits than I could count, that the difference in a household before and after this kind of prayer is not subtle. If you are not sure whether something in your possession falls into one of the categories we have discussed today, ask. Bring it to your priest and ask. There is no foolish question in this area. The only foolish thing is carrying weight you were never meant to carry because you were too uncertain to ask someone who could help. And I want to say one more thing. To the woman who is watching this and who is right now thinking about a specific object, something she has been uncertain about, something that has been at the back of her mind since the moment she inherited it or found it or simply never dealt with. You already know. That small persistent discomfort, that quiet reluctance to look at it directly, that is not anxiety. That is your soul telling you something your mind has been afraid to confirm. Trust it. The spiritual instincts of a faithful woman who has prayed her whole life are not nothing. They are something, and they deserve to be taken seriously. A home is not just walls and furniture. It is a domestic church. That is what the church has always called it, a domestic church. And a church is a place where God dwells, a place that has been set apart, a place where the air itself is different because of what has been prayed in it, what has been offered in it, what has been consecrated in it over years and decades of faithful life. That is what your home is, and you have the right, and I would say the responsibility, to protect it. If what I have shared today has stirred something in you, I want to ask you to stay close. Each week I come here to share what 40 years at the side of the grieving and the dying has taught me about the things that matter most, the invisible realities, the spiritual truths that most people are too busy or too frightened to sit with. Subscribe and come back, because I believe you are ready for more of this, and I am deeply honored to be the one to share it with you. One thing remains before you go back to your day. Receive this blessing and carry it with you. May God, who is Lord of every room you have ever lived in, walk through your home today and make it wholly His. May every object that belongs there speak only of His mercy, and may every weight that does not belong, known or unknown, inherited or forgotten, be lifted from you by the hand that has always been stronger than your grief. And may you know, with the certainty of a child who has never truly been lost, that the one you are praying for is held by that same hand, completely, without condition, forever. Go in His peace.